Hello, today we are talking about citing internet sources. And when we cite internet sources, it's really helpful to stick to the 4 basic principles of citing. If you don't know the 4 basic principles of citing yet, you might want to have a look at our Cite It Right Basics videos. That's where we explain the principles in detail. Well, when we have a look at what the most common mistakes are when citing internet sources, we can find that they are connected to the first and the third principle, the principle of usability and the principle of retrievability. Because internet sources are so easy to access, we tend to forget that they are still copyright protected and that we need some legal ground on which we can cite them. And we also find that the reference in the reference list is often incomplete or also sometimes incorrect. Especially the information on the author is sometimes wrong. But let me first clarify what I mean when I talk about internet sources. Because when we talk about internet sources, we actually have a lot of different kinds of sources. We have websites, we have reports, we have journal articles, also known as papers. We have books, thesis, like a dissertation, PhD thesis. We have images and statistics, so some kind of graphs. We have blogs and many other types of documents. Now, it would be great if you could just cite all these different types of internet sources the same way, but unfortunately we can't. But as a rule of thumb, you can say that you always cite these document types like their offline equivalent. So like a printed book or a journal article plus URL. So as you have an internet source, you always need a URL. So we already know that internet sources are not just web pages, but that there are a lot of different types of internet sources and that we have to cite them differently. Now let's have a look at the elements of a source citation and whether there isn't some kind of common pattern. And then we will have a look at 4 different examples. We'll have a look at web pages, at reports, at product fact sheets, and also at images from Statista. Here we have the most common document types we usually cite. We have an ebook, an electronic journal article, and a chapter from an edited book. And we are going to look for the kind of common denominator. What's the pattern? And isn't there a pattern we can apply to all internet sources? By the way, all the examples we give in this video are formatted in the APA 7 style. Right, let's have a look what we can find. The first piece of information we can always find is a person, an author. Brink A, Bryson D, or Gander HH. So it's always a person who created this work. In this case, it's always an author, but for other types of works, it might be a composer, an artist, a cartographer, or some other kind of creating person. In the third example, we have not just Gander HH, but also J. Jacob and M. Meyer, and here we have the addition in brackets EDS, which stands for editors, which means they didn't write this article, they collected different articles and then kind of made a book out of this. So in this case, they are not the authors, so for now we are going to ignore the editors and just continue. The next piece of information we always have is a year or some kind of publication date. In this case, it's only the year, but for other document types, you might have to give the exact date, or if, for example, if it's a post from a forum or something, from some kind of platform where the communication goes back and forth, even several times a day, then you would also have to give the exact time. So it depends on the type of document, whether the year is enough or you need the date or even the time. The next piece of information is the title. So that's fairly easy. So it always tells us what the work is about or what kind of work it is. And up to this point, it looks like really easy and very straightforward. Author, year, title. If we have a look at the information that is left, the yellow bits here, it starts to get a bit messy. In the first example, we have a publisher and a URL. In the second example, we have the title of a journal, the volume, issue, and page numbers and URL where this article was published in this journal. And in the third example, we have the editors, the name of the book the article was published in, the pages on which the article was published in the book, the name of the publisher, and the URL. So very different pieces of information. But what they all have in common is that they all tell us where this article or where this piece was published. Published by a publisher, published in a journal, or published in a book. And then, of course, we always need the information which journal, which issue, where was the book published. So then we always need the information to find the journal or the book. So it always tells us where the work we want to cite was published. So to create a correct and complete reference entry, the reference always has to answer 4 questions, the 4 W questions. Who created the work? When was it published? What kind of work is it? And where was it published? And that's actually really helpful because that's a really easy thing to check. If you already have a reference list, you could just go through it reference by reference and check whether your references answer all 4 questions. If not, complete your reference. So that's a really easy way to kind of eliminate this kind of mistake. So let's have a look at some examples. And we start with web pages. The biggest problem when citing internet sources, and especially when citing web pages, is often to find these 4 pieces of information. So that's what we are going to train here in this video, to find the 4 different pieces of information, the answers to the 4 W questions. The website we're going to cite is defined under this URL, and that's the website we want to cite. And now we are just going to look for the answers to the 4 W questions. So the first thing we can easily find is the title, Antibiotic Resistance and Hospital Infections. If we have a look at the site, I can't find an author or a date so far, so let's scroll down. Here I can find a publication date, the 17th of August 2017, but I still can't find an author. So we have the title and the date. And of course we have the URL because I gave that to you already. What we couldn't find is who the author is. And if you can't find an author, don't just go looking in the imprint and use some managing director or CIO as the author, because they are usually not the ones who wrote the piece. They are not the authors. In this case, we don't have a person as the author, but an institution. Here the Robert Koch Institute acts as the author. And that is something very common for web pages or also for internet sources in general. If we can't find an author, often an organization or an institution takes the place of the author. So if we have a look what the reference will look like in the reference list, we have the Robert Koch Institute as the author, the 17th of August 2017 as the publication date. And as it's a website, and websites change very often, here we give the exact date and not just the year. Then we have the title, Antibiotic Resistance and Hospital Infections, and the URL from which we retrieved the website. Well, often if we have website, we can't find a publication date because often it's just not given. If you can't find a publication date, we recommend that you give an access date instead. So in this case, for the APA stay, for example, you would just kind of put in front of the URL the date you access the website. For example, retrieved July 3rd, 2019 from, and then you give the URL. 2 more things which are important when citing web pages is, if you, for example, cite a subpage from a bigger web page, then you need to cite exactly the subpage you cite, not the index or welcome page. Of course, this can lead to the situation that if you cite several subpages, you also have several entries in your reference list which are very similar because they're from the same bigger web page, but they all refer to different subpages, and that's correct. Web pages often have hundreds of subpages, and if you would just give the index page, your reader wouldn't have a chance to really find the exact pages you cited, especially if they change a lot. So you really have to give the exact subpage in your reference list. And if you have several subpages from the same web presence, that's correct. Let's also have a look at the URLs. Please make sure that you don't use a Google results link. They are not just very ugly and very long, but they are also not permanent. So make sure you really give the original link to the website. And if you have a DOI, which is great because it's a unique identifier, the state of the art is that you also give the DOI as URL. And if you don't know the link, you can simply use a prefix to the DOI. You can simply use http://dx.doi.org/ in front of the DOI, and then you have a working DOI link. So that's how you should do it. Let's have a look at our second example. Here we have a report. You can find the report under this URL, and that's what it looks like. It's the Global Report on Diabetes by the World Health Organization. Right, again, we are looking for our 4 answers. What we can easily find is the title, and here we have the World Health Organization, but we can't find an author. Usually, authors are given on the front page. So far, we can't find an author, but let's have a look. But we might have a similar situation like before, that here the organization acts as the author. But if we have a look at the second page, we can again find the title and in the copyright information, the World Health Organization. So they really seem to be the author here. Also, there is no other author indicated. Then we have the publication year, that's 2016. And here we have a PDF. PDFs usually don't change a lot, so you can just give the year. Now we still need to find out where it was published. And here's one interesting piece of information. We have an ISBN. That's interesting because on the one hand, it tells us that this report is a book. ISBN stands for International Standard Book Number. And on the other hand, we can use it as an aid if we want to check whether the information we extracted from the source is correct. We can also have a look at the entries in library catalogs, see how they do it. Right, let's have a look at the information on the place we can find here. We have the World Health Organization as the publisher, not just the author, but also the publisher. And we have Geneva, Switzerland. But at the bottom, we can also find the information printed in France. Well, it's good to know that it's completely irrelevant where something was printed. We would give the place where the publisher is located, but not the printer. So we can ignore the printer, and Geneva, Switzerland would be our place of publication here. Now, it depends on the citation style whether a place of publication is given in the reference or whether only the name of the publisher is given. And of course, we have the URL. If we format it like it's a book, as we know it is, we have the World Health Organization as the author, 2016 as the publication year, Global Report on Diabetes as the title, and again the World Health Organization as the publisher. Many citation styles would omit the publisher if it's the same as the author. So here in this case you would skip the second World Health Organization, and the APA 7 style doesn't give the place of publication anymore. The 6th version did. Here you would have World Health Organization, Geneva, Switzerland, and then retrieved from, but the 7th edition doesn't give the place anymore. And if you didn't have an ISBN here, so it we didn't know it was a book, we would just cite it like a regular internet source, and then we would just have the WHO as the organization, the year, the title, and the URL where we retrieved the source from. Depending on the citation style, you might also have to give the ISBN if there is one given, but it depends on the style whether you give the ISBN or not. Right, let's have a look at our third example. Here it's a product fact sheet. You can find the document under the first URL, and it was provided by this second URL. It's 2 pages long, so that's our product fact sheet in total. And if we have a look for our 4 answers, we can find the title, E27, pendant lamp, EU version. Here I can't find an author or a year. If I have a look at the second page at the bottom, we can find some information, but that's information on the standards and certificates. So all the years we can see here are no good to us, and there's also no author mentioned. So again, we have the organization as the author, and as we don't have a publication year, for PDFs, you could also have a look in the PDF settings. That's sometimes quite useful. If you have a look at the settings, you can find the creation date. It was created on the 6th of December 2022. For PDFs, we don't need the exact date. The year is enough, so the 2022 is what we need here. So let's have a look. We have the organization, we have the publication year, the title, and of course the URL where we retrieved the source from. Now in this case, it was a little hard to find the URL to the PDF. And we have a PDF, we always give the exact URL to the PDF. And in this case, on the website where I found the link to the PDF, when I clicked the link, it directly opened up the PDF, but I couldn't see the link. So I had to go one step back to kind of go to the link to the PDF and right click and say copy link to find the link to the PDF. So sometimes that's a bit tricky. So let's have a look at our last example, and this one is a tricky one. You can find it under this URL, and that's what we are going to cite, this image from Statista. Let's look for our 4 pieces of information. Here we have the title. When we have a look for the dates, we actually find different dates. We find January 2019 here in the details. We find 2023 in the copyright information. And then we have a release date which says May 2019. Well, that's a bit confusing, so we need to get further into detail and have a look which of the dates is the correct one for us. If we have a look at the author, we have on the one hand Statista in the copyright information, but we also have source information. So apparently Statista is not the original source. Apparently Statista cites some other source. So we of course first have to have a look at this original source by the BDEW. And there is a source link, and if we follow this link, we will find the original source. So that's what we are going to do. That's the source. That's where apparently Statista got the information from. And let's first check whether this image is actually in the source. Just make sure. And what we can find is this. So on the left-hand side, you can see the image which is in the original source, and on the right-hand side, the image from Statista. And you can see that apparently Statista didn't cite the image, but only the data from the image. If we compare the data, we can see that it's exactly the same data. It's just translated, and Statista made their own image. So apparently we have 2 different sources here. We have the PDF for the data, and we have Statista for the image. Let's first have a look at the PDF and the information for the reference for the data. Here we have the title, Meinungsbild E-Mobilität, and the date of publication, 27th of May 2019. if we have a look through the document, again, we can't find a person who is the author. We can find contact persons, but they are not the authors. So in this case, again, we have the institution or the organization, the BDEW, the Bundesverband der Energie- und Wasserwirtschaft e.V., who act as the author here. And the URL we had already, that was the URL which was given as a source link in Statista. So all the information we need on the data source. Now let's have a look at the information for the image in Statista. We can now see that the data was collected in January 2019, so it wasn't the publication date, that was the release date, so that's the date we use for the PDF for the data. And now it makes sense where we have 2023 here as another date, because that's the date when Statista created this image. So we need 2023 for the source citation on the image. Then we also have Statista for the image and the title, in your opinion, who should be mainly responsible for advancing electric mobility in Germany. Now here we have something interesting. We have a citation format to export. That is something very typical for databases. Often databases offer some kind of citation format which we can simply export and use. And in most cases, these suggestions are really good and we just have to adapt them to our citation style. But in this case, it is not. So let's have a look at it. Here we have BDEW as the author, and then May 2019 as the publication year. And then we have, in your opinion, who should be mainly responsible for advancing electric mobility in Germany? Graph in Statista and so on. And to me, this looks like really fishy, because we have the BDEW, that was the source of the data, but then we have the title from the Statista image. So apparently they merged these two references. And that's something you just can't do. You cannot just merge two different references. So we really have to differentiate and give two sources as separate references in our reference list. So let's have a look how to do this. In the in-text citation, we differentiate between the source for the image, which is Statista 2023, and the source of the data, which is the BDEW 2019. In the reference list, we have then two sources. For the image, Statista 2023, in your opinion, who should be mainly responsible for advancing electric mobility in Germany, and the URL. And then, as the source for the data, we have the BDEW, Bundesverband der Energie- und Wasserwirtschaft e.V., 2019, Meinungsbild E-Mobility, and the link. So here we have really two sources for this one image, because the data comes from one source and the image from another one. Now that was a tricky one, but I wanted to really go through it with you because I think it's really helpful, because that's a situation we have several times. It just comes up again and again. Now we know that we have a lot of different types of internet sources and that we have to cite them differently, but we also know that there is a kind of common denominator, that each of our references has to answer the 4W questions: the who created it, when was it published, what kind of work is it, and where was it published, to have a correct and complete reference entry. And this is also very useful if you use less common document types, which might not even be defined in our citation style. Then we have to kind of adapt them to the general pattern of our citation style, but we know what kind of the essential information is each reference has to contain. And of course, the formatting always depends on your citation style, so that can differ. Right, that's it for today. So if you have any further questions regarding citing internet sources, just contact your university library.